The movie transports us to the abbey in Romania, set in the year 1952. Inside, a young nun named Victoria walks alongside an older nun down a dimly lit hallway. The elderly nun clutches a key, its significance yet to be revealed. Drawing closer to the end of the corridor, the older nun unlocks a wooden door with a foreboding sign that reads, "God ends here." With unwavering resolve, the elder nun steps across the threshold. Left alone, Victoria kneels before the open door, praying for protection. Moments pass, and the older nun returns, her body covered in blood, bearing the key in her trembling hands. She imparts to Victoria a solemn instruction. She must not allow the demon to claim her. In an instant, an unseen force from within the room yanks the older nun back. Driven by panic, she flees to a room at the far end of the hallway and slams the door shut. She grasps a rope. Burdened by the weight of her desperate decision, she seeks forgiveness from a higher power for the act of sin she's about to commit. Clutching the key tightly, she wraps the rope around her neck. As she glances over her shoulder, the demonic nun, known as Valak, slowly inches closer, the symbol of the cross now inverted in her presence. In her final moments, Victoria leaps and kills herself. At a later time, we find ourselves introduced to a young man named Frenchie who provides the abbey with deliveries. He stumbles upon the haunting sight of Victoria's decaying body hanging lifelessly. Meanwhile, in the sacred halls of the Vatican, high-ranking church officials gathered to discuss the tragic news. Father Burke is notified of Victoria's demise and is tasked to investigate her death. He's also supposed to check if the grounds of the abbey are still holy, as the church holds suicide as an unforgivable sin. They provide him with crucial information about the individual who discovered Victoria's corpse. They also assign a young novitiate named Irene to assist him in his quest for answers. He visits the monastery and convinces Irene to join him. Taking a moment to brief her on the church's directive, he ensures they are both aligned in their mission. They reach Frenchie's place, where they hope to gather more clues. In the presence of Irene, Frenchie immediately begins flirting. "Well, do I have news for you?" Attempting to make a charming impression, he introduces himself by kissing Irene's hand. Father Burke, however, introduces himself as a priest and Irene as a nun. Undeterred by Frenchie's initial reluctance, Father Burke implores him to guide them to the abbey. Frenchie hesitates, but when Irene personally appeals to him, he immediately agrees. Hours later, Father Burke, Irene, and Frenchie finally reach their destination. Their first task at the abbey is to find Victoria's body. Frenchie has kept the body in the ice room to preserve it from decay. The room was normally used to keep the deliveries. A door is present for the nuns to collect them without having to come outside. Inside, they come face to face with Victoria's lifeless form, eerily seated. Father Burke carefully examines the body. He discovers the key clenched in her hand. The trio lays Victoria to rest outside the abbey, ensuring she receives a proper burial. Then, they venture into the abbey's interior. They notice traces of Victoria's blood staining the floor. The blood still looks fresh despite the tragedy occurring several weeks earlier. As they walk further, Irene's sharp eyes catch something amiss. A shadowy figure lurks. She addresses the mysterious presence. To their astonishment, the figure reveals itself as the abbess, the highest authority within the abbey. Father Burke informs her that they are here to seek answers about Victoria's demise. She urges them to return tomorrow, when the silence of the nuns will be broken and answers can be found. Until then, she offers them a place to rest, the lodging area within the convent. Meanwhile, Frenchie makes his way back home through the dense forest that lies in his path. A ghostly figure emerges, dressed in the garb of a nun. It is none other than Victoria, the ghost nun. Frenchie, like the moron he is, decides to follow her. Suddenly, the ghost nun reappears right before Frenchie's eyes, hanging from a tree. Panic, he collapses on the ground. He's attacked again by the entity, but he manages to grab a cross from the cemetery and run away. Back at the convent, Irene confides in Father Burke about her past. She recounts numerous visions that have plagued her, accompanied by a persistent thought that lingers. Mary points the way. Father Burke shares his own experiences with Irene. He reveals that he has been entrusted with a young boy named Daniel, who has also been plagued by visions. In an attempt to free Daniel, Father Burke performed an exorcism. His efforts were successful in banishing the malevolent entity that possessed Daniel. However, Daniel suffered severe injuries as a result of the exorcism and passed away in the days that followed. The weight of guilt still hangs heavily on Father Burke's shoulders. Later that night, Father Burke is awakened by the sudden music from the radio. Using a flashlight, he follows the source of the sound. Perplexed, he proceeds to check on Irene, who's sleeping peacefully. Then his eyes catch a glimpse of a fleeting figure, a young boy dashing outside the room. Father follows him through the array of clothes. The boy glances back, revealing features that Father Burke finds strangely familiar. Could it be? The apparition appears to be the ghost of Daniel. Their chase leads them to the graveyard. As Father Burke closes in, the form of a serpent emerges from the boy, lunging at him. Panic courses through Father Burke's veins, but fate betrays him, causing him to stumble into a coffin. He's immediately buried. Meanwhile, Irene finds herself alone within the convent, her path illuminated solely by a lamp. While searching for Father Burke, she hears the church bell toll and follows it. Standing at the forefront, there's a decapitated Christ and a group of nuns chanting prayers. Suddenly, a haunting shadow of a nun glides along the convent walls, beckoning her to follow. To her bewilderment, the group of nuns vanishes. Then the ghastly countenance of Valak materializes before Irene in a chilling instant. Although scared to death, she resumes her search. She uses her power of visions to locate Father Burke's grave as the poor man rings a bell from inside to alert her of his presence. Swiftly grasping a shovel, Irene plunges it into the earth and digs him out before he gets attacked by the spirit inside. The following day dawns, and Father Burke and Irene go to the abbey for answers. However, Father Burke remains outside, while Irene goes inside as it is cloistered. Within the halls of the abbey, Irene is greeted by Sister Owana, who shares the history of this ancient place. She reveals that the abbey was crafted centuries ago by a powerful duke during the Dark Ages. But there's more to this abbey than meets the eye. The duke constructed it to serve as a gateway to hell itself. Through this portal, an evil creature was able to traverse realms and unleash havoc upon the earth. Just then, a brave contingent of Catholics arrived at the abbey to stop the evil duke. With a relic infused with the sacred blood of Jesus, they managed to seal the portal. The Catholics established a sacred tradition of perpetual prayer as a protective barrier, preventing any malevolence from escaping the portal. Alas, the ravages of war reopened the portal once again. Sister Owana further reveals that the demon, Valak, takes the form of the nun and walks around the corridor. Just then, Sister Abigail interrupts their conversation. She urges Irene to leave, but the gates leading out have already been sealed. To stay the night, the nuns take her to Victoria's room. Meanwhile, at the entrance of the abbey, the abbess randomly informs Father Burke that he should go back because Irene is probably lost. Suddenly, the abbess's head drops and she appears to be unconscious. Father Burke, compelled to investigate further, cautiously approaches the motionless abbess and tries to lift the veil. Immediately, the demonic hands of the abbess lunge towards him. Reacting swiftly, Father Burke seizes the demonic hands and shatters them. He then sees a figure and follows it, which leads him to the room of deliveries. There, he's abruptly attacked by Sister Victoria's corpse, but thankfully, Frenchie arrives right on time and saves him. For someone who deals with paranormal activities, he sure gets saved by other people a lot. Anyway, inside the abbey, Irene awakens from a nightmare. Gazing around the room, she notices a nun fervently praying nearby. However, in an instant, the nun dissolves into thin air, revealing the menacing presence of Valak standing behind her. Suddenly, her doors open, and she hears Sister Owana's voice. Driven by curiosity, she ventures out of the room, determined to trace the origin of the voice. She follows a path that leads her to a weathered wooden door, ominously inscribed with the words, "God ends here." Valak, with its grotesque face, emerges from behind, sending shivers down her spine. Paralyzed by fear, she tries to escape. Without warning, Valak lunges towards Irene, desperate to obtain the key she possesses. In a brief moment of bravery, she manages to slip away from Valak's clutches and flees for her life. Suddenly, a hand snatches her wrist. It is Owana, her face etched with concern, who has come to her aid. She urgently instructs Irene to seek refuge in the chapel and join the other nuns in prayer. She hurries towards the chapel and finds another nun praying in Latin. A lifeless body lies shrouded in cloth nearby. When she removes the cloth, she's shocked at the sight. It is the lifeless form of Owana, clutching a cross in her cold hands. Soon after, a group of nuns enters the chapel. Compelled by their presence, Irene joins them in prayer. But in a terrifying turn of events, a force descends upon the nuns, causing them to be hurled away and reducing the statue of Christ to a decapitated ruin. Irene persists as the evil force injures her, creating a demonic symbol on her back. Just as the situation seems dire, Father Burke and Frenchie make their entrance into the chapel, causing the malevolent presence to vanish into thin air. Irene recounts the presence of the praying nuns to Father Burke and Frenchie, but as it turns out, she has been alone all along. The nuns have been a part of her vision. They approach the lifeless body lying at the chapel's end. To their astonishment, the corpse of Sister Owana is an old decaying one. Victoria, the last remaining nun in the abbey, has also met her tragic fate. They understand that her demise was not a suicide, but a sacrificial act to thwart Valak's plan of possession. As the pieces of the puzzle fall into place, they finally realize the abbey is not holy anymore. The inverted cross symbol, the decapitated Christ figure, and the blood of Victoria all point to the same assessment. They decide to seal the portal before leaving. However, the events have made Irene's belief in God firmer, so she decides to take her vows. Frenchie doesn't seem too thrilled with the idea of Irene becoming a nun, though. In the next scene, they search for the relic. Father Burke's keen eyes catch sight of a peculiar detail. The hands of Mary's statue seem to be pointing towards something, igniting a spark of realization in Irene's mind. Her visions now make sense. Mary points that way. They proceed to use Victoria's key, unlocking the secret chamber that conceals the elusive relic. As the door swings open, their eyes widen in awe and astonishment at the sight of the relic. Without hesitation, Father Burke retrieves it and gives it to Irene. Armed with the relic, they advance towards a wooden door, inscribed with the words, "God ends here." Resolute, they cautiously separate and explore their surroundings in search of the portal. Tension fills the air as each step they take carries the potential threat of a demonic encounter. Once inside the room, Irene inadvertently steps on a mysterious symbol, and to her horror, it suddenly lights up, causing her to let out a piercing scream. Overwhelmed by fear, she desperately tries to flee, but blocking her path is a group of nuns with hidden faces. The demonic nuns converge, trapping Irene. Meanwhile, Frenchie, determined to locate Irene, searches for her whereabouts. Eventually, he deduces that she must be behind a particular door. Summoning his courage, he opens the door only to come face to face with the eerie assembly of demonic nuns. He instinctively recoils, tempted to retreat from the room. However, amidst his trepidation, he hears Irene's plea for help. Now he has no option but to help her out. He navigates through the congregation of demonic nuns. In a tense moment, the demonic nuns part, unveiling Irene in an unnatural posture. Frenchie carefully unveils Irene's face, only to discover that she has become possessed by Valak. Without warning, Valak launches a vicious attack on Frenchie, labeling him a Frenchman. Seizing a perfect comic timing, Frenchie retorts, proclaiming himself as French-Canadian. Swiftly, Frenchie grabs the relic containing the sacred blood of Christ and hastily smears it across Irene's face. Miraculously, the holy blood serves as a powerful weapon against Valak, expelling the wicked spirit from Irene's tormented body. However, as Frenchie triumphs, Valak retaliates, tightening its grip around his throat until he becomes inconvenient. Simultaneously, Valak's fury extends to Irene, unleashing a bone-chilling scream that throws her into a nearby water pool. Meanwhile, Father Burke races down the hallway, desperately trying to reach Irene. Suddenly, a serpent, summoned by the demonic presence of Daniel, wraps itself around Father Burke's neck, tightening its grip. In a desperate attempt to free himself, Father Burke grabs hold of the snake, but in the process, it sinks its venomous fangs into his eyes. He manages to break free from the serpent's clutches, gasping for breath. He quickly makes his way to where Irene is by the water pool. The murky depths of the pool begin to stir, revealing the ghastly visage of Valak emerging slowly. Without warning, Valak swiftly submerges Irene in the water. In a desperate bid to combat Valak's evil, Father Burke fervently recites a powerful prayer. However, Valak's piercing scream sends Father Burke hurling through the air, crashing against the wall. Meanwhile, Irene takes the relic containing the blood of Christ and places it in her mouth. At the moment Valak hoists her up, Irene defiantly spits the sacred blood onto Valak's repulsive face. Finally, the portal seizes hold of Valak, dragging the malevolent entity away, victorious. Irene, on the other hand, remains submerged, struggling against the suffocating depths of the water. Just in the nick of time, Frenchie arrives, determined to rescue her from her watery grave. With urgency, Frenchie administers mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, desperately trying to revive Irene. Slowly but surely, Irene regains consciousness, her eyes fluttering open. Frenchie apologizes to Irene, explaining that his actions were merely an act of rescue, a non-romantic gesture meant to save her life. In gratitude, Irene expresses her thanks to Frenchie, who reveals his name to be Maurice for his efforts in saving her. In the next scene, we find ourselves at the Abbey, where Father Burke, Irene, and Maurice are preparing to depart in a carriage. However, just as they are about to leave, Maurice's hand instinctively reaches for the back of his neck. An inverted cross mark is etched on his nape. Fast forward to 20 years later, and we find ourselves in a lecture room where Carolyn Perrin watches as Ed and Lorraine show the footage of an exorcism. Morris is possessed by Valak, and Lorraine is trying to exorcise him. Thus, this ties in with the other Conjuring movies, providing a story for the origins of the demon, Valak. The puzzle pieces start to fit together as we learn that Morris's role as a world traveler plays a pivotal part in Valak's sinister plans.